We look forward to the time when there is no more night, when your people can come out of hiding, when your people can't stop all the fighting, when peace is established across the nation, and we bow before you in adoration at the New Jerusalem, when the war is done, when the world is new, the tribes are one, the New Jerusalem, that's where we'll be, just worshiping the King of Kings, the God of all.
Shabbat Shalom, and I want to welcome you to a little special edition of this week's Torah portion, and the Parasha is called Vayigash. So I'm Rabbi Clint Fry, and we want to welcome you to this Parasha Vayigash, which was this week's Parasha. Contains kind of one of the most dramatic moments in the Sefer Bereshit, or the book of Genesis, in which Yehuda comes to the aid of his brother Binyamin, or Benjamin. So this story we're talking about, of course, of Judah and Joseph's confrontation. And basically what happens is when Joseph's brothers come to Egypt to get food for the family because they're starving during the 7 years of famine. What happens is Benjamin is imprisoned or framed by Joseph himself, or in Hebrew his name is Yosef, and the brothers don't even know, of course, that Joseph is Joseph. Of course, they don't recognize him, and he is just a high Egyptian official to them. All right, so what happens is Joseph has placed his silver goblet in the sack of Benjamin, and as the brothers leave the city, Yosef dispatches his armed guards to track them down. And so Yehuda, or Judah, says, which is one of his older brothers, said, "Search our belongings. We have nothing to hide, and if you find anything, that person that's found to have taken the goblet of the king shall die." So obviously when they found the goblet in Benjamin's sack, what is Yehuda or Judah going to say now? Joseph says, "Don't worry, I'm not going to kill the thief. I will just take him as my slave. The rest of you can go." So what is Yehuda supposed to do now? What's Judah supposed to do? What do you think? So Yehuda had basically promised his father that he would bring Benjamin back alive, but of course he had never thought that Benjamin would steal the cup of the king. Of course, he doesn't know that Benjamin was framed on purpose by Joseph himself. So most of us would have probably gone back to Yaakov or Jacob and said, "Look, what are we going to do? It's true Benjamin was taken captive. We should count ourselves lucky that Benjamin's still alive." But of course, this is not what Judah does. Now, Judah made kind of a last-ditch effort or attempt in order to save Benjamin by any means possible, and basically his means included an impassioned speech that he makes to Joseph. And in that speech, he tells the whole story, the painful story, basically starting from what happened when they sold Joseph into slavery, not understanding that he's speaking to him, of course, himself. He says, "You don't understand," he said, "our father had already lost a child of his beloved wife, Rachel. If you take this last child, Benjamin, from him, the last remaining vestige of Rachel, or Rachel, He says, Nafsho kishura benafsho. My father's soul is bound up with Benjamin's soul. I mean, he is so attached to him, just like he was with Joseph, of course, before Joseph was sold into slavery. He says, if you take Benjamin from him, he will die. So please take me instead. Now, this is really cool. Judah's redemption for selling Joseph. Okay, this is where we're going to lead into now. There was a time when Judah or Yehuda had allowed a brother, a child of Rachel, to be sold into slavery because the father loved Rachel more, and because the father, of course, loved that child more. So now, of course, would not be so this time. Now, Judah says, I know that my father loved Rachel more than my mother. I know that he loves Benjamin more than me. I know that his soul is bound up with Benjamin, but that's okay with me. Take me instead. Let Benjamin go back to his father. And this is kind of an interesting how this ties in with, and we'll get into that a little bit later, how the same thing, we can say that Jesus does the same thing. Yeshua does the same thing for us, okay? It's perhaps, of course, Judah's finest moment, and it succeeds in ending basically a long and painful story of the sale of Joseph that had happened 40 years before, 30 years. Joseph cries, he reveals who he really is, and the long story, the whole long charade is over, okay? So he can no longer pretend like he doesn't know them, they don't know him. And however, we can ask this question. Where else in the Torah do we hear these words, nafsho kishura benafsho, or where one person's soul is bound up with another person's soul? It turns out that the language appears in the book of Samuel, in the book of Sefer Shmuel, or Sefer Shmuel Aleph, Perek Yud Het, chapter 18. Okay, so we can read together some of these verses, and the parallels, there are many parallels to Judah and Joseph's story in the Bible. So the verses appear also in the story of David and Goliath. In that story, Goliath, or Goliath, had threatened the first king of Israel, Shaul, or Saul, and no one from the Jews thought that they could fight him. Then this little shepherd boy, David, kind of rises to the challenge and miraculously fells the giant with a stone from his sling, as we all know. And it says, Uchshuv David mahakot eha plishti. And when David returned from killing the Philistine, Vayach oto Avner. Avner took him. Okay, so Vayevayu lifnei Shaul, and brought him before Shaul the king, Saul the king. Verosh haplishti biyado, and the head of the Philistine was in his hands. Vayomer alev Shaul, and Shaul said, Ben mi ata hanar, whose child are you, my son? David responds, Vayomer David ben Avdacha Ishai bait ha-lachmi. And that means I am the child of Ishai or Jesse from Bethlehem. So it's kind of strange, by the way, that Saul or Shaul would be kind of asking this question in the first place, because whose child are you? The truth is that Saul already knows who David is. Before this, David had been playing in the harp for Shaul in his house, okay, in the palace. They already knew each other. But somehow this question, and by the way, we can listen to the question, not just who are you? He says, whose child are you? So David's response is, I am the child of Ishai or Jesse. And the next words are, Vayi kechaloto ledaber es Shaul. And after David said this to Shaul, Nefesh Yehonatan Niksha Benefesh David. The soul of Yehonatan or Jonathan became bound up with the soul of David. So remember what we were talking about before, where the soul of Benjamin and the father were so tied together. It's like an intertwining of two souls. Okay. Vayevehu Yehonatan kenafsho. And Yehonatan, or Jonathan, loved him like his own self. And here we have kind of basically two echoes of these echoes of Joseph's story. And Yehuda had once talked about this. Yehuda, or Judah, said that Yaakov's soul, Jacob's soul, was bound up with Benjamin. And now the Torah is using the same language to describe Jonathan falling in love with David. All right? So why are we quoting from Joseph's story, and what does this mean? Okay. V'yikacheu Shaul beyom hahu. The next words, and Shaul took David that day. Lo natno lashuv bait aviv, and didn't let him return to his father's house. He kept him in the palace. So what happened next was kind of interesting. Vayikot Yehonatan v'David brit. And at that moment, Yehonatan, or Jonathan, and David made a covenant one to the other. Be'ahavato oto kinafsho, because Jonathan, or Jonathan, loved him like his own self. Vayit pashet Yehonatan et hameil. And Yehonatan, or Jonathan, took off his cloak, Vayitneo David, and gave it to David. So what's going on here? Remember the cloak we talked about earlier in this last week about how Joseph was the most favored son of his father, and his had a multicolored cloak. So here, basically, something very important is happening. It's not just that Jonathan or Yehonatan is giving David his cloak, but something is really interesting, and we'll go into that a little bit later. What is going on is that we are hearing kind of a little bit of the rippling effects of Joseph's story, because these men are the descendants of two prime actors in Joseph's story. Okay, because who is Shaul and who is Jonathan, his son? Well, if you didn't know, Shaul is a king from the tribe of Benjamin. And who is David? David is from the tribe of Judah, Yehuda. So here we have Yehuda and Benjamin one more time together, many years later, of course. Judah kind of transcends the rivalry of Joseph and his brothers. And in the story of Joseph and his brothers, Judah risked his life for Benjamin. Okay, Judah came face to face with the recognition that his father loves Benjamin more, would rather have Benjamin home with him than Judah, and that was okay with him. So Judah says, take me instead. It's okay, you can love him more. But what did Benjamin? Well, when did Benjamin ever repay Judah for this? Jonathan, Yehonatan, repays that debt, because what does it look like from Yehonathan's perspective when David comes back triumphant? If you are Jonathan, who is going to be next in line to become king? You are. So who does your father love? You. And now we can kind of look at how Shaul is treating David. Suddenly, the King Saul is treating David like a son. Okay, Saul took him, adopted him as his own son that day, and didn't allow David to return back to his father's house. He's saying, you are mine. You're my son. Okay, he would not let him go back to his house. He made him stay at the palace. So here we have Jonathan from the tribe of Benjamin, basically making restitution to Judah. Okay, so Saul knows that David will one day become king, and what would that mean for Jonathan or Yehonatan? Yehonatan, for him, it's the greatest threat that he could possibly imagine. But that's not how he sees it. It says, Benefesh Yehonatan Nikshra Benefesh David. The heroism of this child of Benjamin basically mirrors the heroism of the original Judah. Judah had once said this for Benjamin. Now a child of Benjamin will say it for Judah. Okay, so it's not threatening for me that father would love another child more than me. Let father take David. I love David like my own soul. And then he takes off his cloak. He strips himself of his cloak and gives it to David. He's giving that authority back to David, because that's what a cloak meant back then, especially a multicolored cloak, or even a purple cloak maybe. It was a sign of authority, and he's taking that cloak off and giving it to David. So the tribe of Benjamin is recognizing the tribe of Judah again as the one in authority. Okay, so what does this remind you of? We can say that there was a time when a child of Rachel's did have a cloak, like I said, stripped by Judah forcibly in the sale of Joseph. So Judah was the one that took off that cloak off of Joseph before they sold him into slavery. All right. So now, this time though, it's not forcible. The child of Rachel, child of Benjamin, willingly strips his cloak and gives it to the child of Judah. It is a moment of healing, a moment in history where, at least at that brief point, the two sides of the family were reconciled. Because of the moment when a man faced his greatest possible threat, he turned his back on his own welfare, loved his brother from the other side of the family like his own self. The memories of the sale of Joseph run deep, but the heroism of Yehonathan, is that he didn't remember just the animosity. He remembered also the sacrifice. But he remembered the love, and in that remembrance lies Yehonathan's greatness. Now, this week's parasha, the Parasha Vayigash, opens with Judah's impassioned plea to the high Egyptian official, who is really his long-lost brother Joseph, as we said. Now, there's kind of a fascinating undercurrent, and we can argue that lies under the surface of Judah's words. What he is saying is actually kind of reminiscent of an event that occurred a long time ago, way back in the Garden of Eden, of all things, if we want to remember that far back. So we can want to explore that echo together. And is the echo really there? What might it mean? So what happens? Like I said, Joseph frames Benjamin, and the connection kind of begins with Judah's explanation as to why Benjamin can't stay behind in Egypt. Benjamin, of course, has been framed by Joseph for stealing his silver goblet. Joseph, this high Egyptian official, has suggested that the thief remain behind as his personal slave, while all the other brothers return to their father in Canaan. Now, of course, Judah, now begins to speak about why that can't be allowed to happen. Why Benjamin at all costs has to be allowed to return to his father. And here are his words. La yuchal han ladzov et aviv. The boy is unable to leave his father. This is found in Genesis chapter 44, verse 22. Now, if you happen to listen to those words, that phrase, to leave his father, okay, ladzov et aviv, you know, you've heard the phrase before. It is constructed precisely the same way as a phrase we hear all the way back in the Garden of Eden, a phrase that describes marriage of all the things. Okay. Yisov ish et aviv mo. It says, because of this, in other words, because Eve was formed from Adam's rib, a man leaves behind his father and his mother. In Genesis chapter 2, verse 24. So this is kind of interesting, right? The phrase, la'dzov et aviv, leaving behind father, is now showing up again, this time in Judah's speech about Benjamin, of all things. And it's kind of strange. So there kind of echoes to Joseph and Benjamin's story. And that lone echo of Eden might be kind of dismissed as mere coincidence, except that there is kind of another echo too. We go back to the opening words of Judah's speech to Joseph, and you will find him saying, Yesh la zachin ivetzo in katan. We have an older father, and the son born to him in his old age. Then he goes on to say, Leachim mei le mater imatovimo. His brother is dead, so he alone remains of his mother. This is found in Genesis chapter 44, verse 20. He alone remains, right? So there's the word alone. Okay. But of course we know, imatov, he's not. Okay. So it reminds you something back in the Garden of Eden. Here they had somebody was alone. Also, levado. And who was that? Adam was alone, levado. And God had not thought that this was very good. So he created Eve to be Adam's companion in marriage. And now, for some reason, Judah is using the very word levado, or alone, to describe Benjamin. He's saying, hey, this guy doesn't have a brother. However, if these connections, if they really are there and not just a product of our imagination, they seem a little strange. And why are they there? Benjamin isn't getting married. There's no romance in this story. So why would such echoes exist in the story? What is the Torah trying to tell us? So here's a theory that I would like to share with you. And maybe the connection between these two stories has to do with what is about to happen next. Joseph and Benjamin's missing connection. So you see, Adam is alone and he's about to meet Eve, another person. What's she going to do? She's going to complete him. Okay, so Benjamin too is alone, and although he doesn't know it yet, he is about to meet his long lost brother. In other words, he's going to have that completion he's so long longed for. He and Yehuda, are about to discover that this high Egyptian official before whom they are pleading is actually their long-lost brother Joseph. This means that each of these people, Adam on one hand, Benjamin on the other, has another half, as it were, a person he's deeply connected to, someone who completes him. And each is alone, sort of separated from that person. For Adam, that person is Eve, a woman quite literally created from his own rib. And without her, he is missing something essential. He's missing his feminine side. Okay, he's only a part of what he needs to be, and with her, he is complete. Man was once a part of his father and mother when he's single, and what makes him ready to leave that unity? Only to seek another unity, because he understands that in order to really be whole, he has to come together and with that lost rib, with that feminine side of himself that he is missing. And it's only because he understands that he's missing that lost feminine side that he can bring himself to leave his father and mother. So we can say, Al cheniya azavi ishtavi vatimo vaterach bisto basarach. Okay, this is why a man leaves behind his mother and his father and clings to his wife, and they become one flesh. Genesis chapter 2, verse 24. However, this is not only when we're missing a spouse that we may feel alone and fragmented. We can also feel a shell of ourselves, only a part of ourselves, when we're missing someone who, by rights, should be with us. Like in this case, Benjamin and Joseph should be at our side in our family too. So when we become estranged from someone in our family, the painful sense of loss and fragmentation is, you can feel it, it's palpable. And on the other side, when against all odds, we find a way to seek out another person again, when brothers somehow find a way to put aside that which separates them, sisters, whoever, when they finally found each other again and pull that, the pull that brings them close is kind of magnetic and basically irresistible. So here we have the Joseph and Benjamin's family link, okay? Benjamin and Joseph, and together they were deeply an entwined pair. Okay, they're the only two children of Rachel, and yet fate would separate them. Joseph would be sold off as a slave to Egypt, and it wasn't just geographical distance that would separate them. Joseph would eventually become estranged from the family. He becomes a part of a whole new culture and a whole new life. All right. I mean, he's so changed that they don't even recognize him. He looks like an Egyptian, dresses like him, acts like him. And of course, even in Egypt, Joseph remains a God-fearing man while he's there. And except in this moment, as Judah faces off against him in the episode of the silver goblet, reconciliation with his family seems to be the furthest thing from his mind. So Yosef had just framed his brothers, He's falsely accusing them of stealing his silver goblet. Joseph seems truly estranged from his family, but through the power of Judah's words, Joseph is somehow transformed, okay? Something happens to his heart. Judah describes that aloneness of Benjamin, him being all that is left of Rachel, Rachel, their mother, and Joseph's heart seems to kind of melt at this portrayal that he's giving. So in tears, he finally unmasks himself. He reveals himself to be Benjamin's long-lost other half, almost like Adam and Eve. Joseph and Benjamin, they finally found each other drawn to each other. Okay, so they embrace with tears of joy as they kind of revel in their newfound sense of completion, and they have found each other at long last. Okay, so Joseph saves his family and from Benjamin to his brothers. So I want to close by adding one more point, basically. Joseph's embrace to Benjamin is dramatic and emotional, but it also serves as a hopeful entry point into something larger. Because then we can look what happens right after Benjamin and Joseph embrace. It's kind of an interesting. Vaynashe lecho lecha vaychalchem bahachal, rem rua avito. And then he kissed all his other brothers too and cried upon them. And afterwards, his brothers spoke to him. This is in Genesis 45, verse 15. Now, this might not seem anything important, but in the end, it wasn't just Benjamin. There was a larger circle of brothers from whom Joseph had been estranged. And now Joseph, he first reaches out, of course, to Benjamin, his closest brother, but then he reaches out to the other brothers and embraces them and kisses them too. And it is kind of as if Benjamin is a kind of stepping stone for Joseph, way back into connection with the larger family, the children of Leah, more broadly. But here's also another thing. The conclusion of the verse we just read is also odd. Okay. V'hachrechem dibriu avito. And afterwards, his brothers spoke with him. Now, why is this important? It kind of seems like the ultimate anticlimax. It's like, okay, what's this all about? Why is this important? Well, here are Joseph and his brothers. They haven't seen each other for years. The brothers had thrown him in a pit, and he in turn had very nearly taken them all as his slaves many years later. And now they reunite in tears and hugs, and it's all wonderful. And so why add this thing about, and afterwards his brothers spoke with him? Who really cares about this, right? So besides, what did he even want to speak about? We don't know. The Torah doesn't bother telling us. So why is it so important to relate the seemingly trivial detail? Maybe they're talking about, hey, remember that time when? Like people do when they want to get caught up on things. Who knows? However, I don't believe it's trivial at all. Okay, Joseph is helping his family to heal. So we can go back to the very beginning of the whole Joseph story, and you can see what's going on here. The Torah, in this grand arc, is kind of closing the circle because all the way back to the beginning, the estrangement between the brothers that we've been talking about, how did it all start? Okay, it expressed itself through the brothers, all the brothers, and the ability to speak to Joseph because he had this nice multicolored coat from daddy and they didn't speak to him. They were jealous. So, Vayorecha Hiotoha Aviva Michocho Achav Aishnua Sofolo Yablu Dabro Lashalom. And the brothers saw that it was he who their father loved from among all his brothers, and they hated him and could not speak to him in peace. This is found in Genesis chapter 37, verse 4. So let's kind of add it all up. At the very beginning, the brothers, their hatred for Joseph was so intense that they could not speak to him in peace. But now, at the end of the story, when all is said and done, what really changed most of all? What changed is that deafening silence in the relationship between the brothers, that silence is now gone. Their brothers at long last can speak to him again. Okay, so that's really important in this case, the fact that they spoke. So as we reach Vayigash, the deafening silence of hatred is finally over, and now whether the wounds of the past will truly and finally heal or whether reconciliation in the Parasha Vayigash will prove to be merely a passing truce in a larger war that we don't know yet. Okay, so Joseph and his brothers will spend a long time together, still in Egypt, and what transpires between them later will decide this whole issue. But for now, a little slice of wholeness has been brought back into the family that was torn apart by pain. So what, in the end, did Joseph and the brothers speak about? Like I said, it doesn't matter. Brothers are once again on speaking terms, and for now, that is the victory of extremely great proportions. So I want to thank you for joining us today, and may you be blessed. Shabbat Shalom.
Now for the Aaronic blessing, adesso la benedizione di Aarone. Yevarechecha Adonai veishmerecha, Yair Adonai panavalecha veichunecha, Yisa Adonai panavalecha veyasim lecha shalom, L'Shem Yeshua HaMashiach, Sarha Shalom Shalom. May the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. In the name of Yeshua the Messiah, the Prince of Peace. Shalom.
Che il Signore vi benedica e vi protegga. Il Signore faccia risplendere il suo volto su di voi e vi sia propizio. Che il Signore elevi il suo volto su di voi e vi dia la pace. In nome di Yeshua, Gesù, il Messia, il Principe della pace. Shalom.
May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you, be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Shalom. Shabbat shalom.